Hi folks. Our State House of Representatives has passed a resolution condemning Governor Tom Wolf's reprieve on 2 death penalty cases in Pennsylvania. Now allow me to stipulate up front that this is not a debate about the death penalty. Good people can disagree in their support of the death penalty, but currently it is the law in Pennsylvania. This is a debate about the rule of law and the executive branch's duty to enforce the law. The governor has issued a reprieve in 2 very heinous murders, which I will detail in a moment. Both cases have endured lengthy appeals over several decades. The criminals fully exhausted all their due process rights. There is no question to the members' guilt, and the governor doesn't question it either. His objection is that the process is flawed and has significant defects. Now let me tell you about the cases. The first is that of Terrance Williams. While on bail for a robbery, Williams brutally murdered a man who had been an intimate acquaintance. While in the victim's home, he stabbed the man with a 10-inch kitchen knife. While the victim was trying to call for help, Williams beat him with a baseball bat. He then stabbed his victim 20 more times, finally stabbing him through the back of the neck until the knife protruded through the other side. He then doused the body with kerosene and attempted to set it on fire. When the police arrived, they found the victim's kerosene-soaked body with the knife jammed through his neck. On the bathroom mirror, the words, "I loved you," were smeared in toothpaste. Before his role in that murder came to light, this vicious predator, Terrance Williams, struck again, committing yet another heinous killing. Along with an accomplice, Williams led his victim, who was someone he knew, to a secluded cemetery where he robbed him. Williams then forced him to remove his clothing and lie face down on the ground. He tied the victim up with his own clothing and jammed his socks in his mouth so he didn't have to hear the man plead for his life. He then found a tire iron and a wrench in the victim's car, and the 2 of them bludgeoned the naked man to death. Williams returned later to douse the body with gasoline and set it on fire and to retrieve the victim's credit cards, which he used to buy himself some jewelry. Williams was convicted of murder and sentenced to death in 1984, and he has been appealing his sentence ever since. His conviction and sentence have been upheld on direct appeal and by federal courts considering his petitions for post-conviction relief. In fact, the result is this case has been upheld no less than 6 times by various courts. His argument has changed over the years, though. While he denied any involvement at the time of trial, he now admits that he committed the crime, but argues that he should not be sentenced to death because the crime was motivated by rage toward the victim who had sexually abused him. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court fully considered his newest arguments and all of the attendant evidence as recently as this past December. Once again, the conviction and sentence were upheld. Williams has had his day in court. In fact, he's had 30 years in court. The second bewildering case that has somehow caused the governor to bizarrely intervene is that of Hubert Michael. Michael's case is just about as straightforward as they come. In 1993, Michael kidnapped 16-year-old Trista Eng at gunpoint. He brutally raped her and shot her 3 times, resulting in her death. While in prison on unrelated charges, he confessed to and described the details of the crime to his brother. After his brother found the body and contacted the police, Hubert Michael was charged with first-degree murder. He pled guilty. He told the judge that he had done it because he was under a lot of pressure due to other unrelated rape charges, and that he took his anger out on her because she was a woman. Michael waived his right to be sentenced by a jury and to present any evidence of mitigating factors, even though he had been fully informed of the fact that this would most likely lead to the imposition of the death sentence. Subsequently, he was sentenced to death for kidnapping and first-degree murder. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court reviewed the evidence and upheld his conviction. There is no question of Michael's guilt. He made a full confession, which was corroborated by the evidence. He never recanted his confession, never suggested that he'd been mentally ill or that he didn't receive effective assistance from his lawyer. Instead, he demonstrated over and over again that he intended to commit the crime and that he understood what he was doing at every step of the proceedings. Hubert Michael's death warrant was signed in July of 1996. But then, ostensibly on his behalf, and less than a week before his scheduled execution, lawyers from an organization that opposes the death penalty petitioned for a stay of execution. Except that it was not on his behalf. Without Michael having ever asked for it, there was another hearing and another appeal, and so on. Michael repeatedly wrote to the courts to tell them that his supposed lawyers were not representing him and that he had no interest in pursuing these endless appeals. But the appeals went on. The case went back up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and then to federal court. In 2006, it went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, but there was never any question about his guilt. By the time it got to the United States Supreme Court, the question was whether a court may hear an appeal in his case over his objection when he is mentally sound. As Michael said himself in one of his nearly dozen letters, the lawyers were not representing him. They were just using him to further their own agenda. Do you think these two killers deserve a reprieve? Of course not. Why then has our governor stepped in to halt their executions? My hope is that it's simply a rookie mistake. Our governor is new to elective office and he could be genuinely confused about his proper role, but I fear it might be more than that. You see, if Tom Wolf opposes the death penalty, and a number of Pennsylvanians do, there are ways he can legitimately address that. The process starts by legislation being introduced into the General Assembly. The governor can have a lawmaker put forth a bill proposing the end of capital punishment. We as lawmakers could then debate that proposal, and if it gained enough support, it would become law. But that's not what he's done. Instead, it seems as if the governor has chosen to abuse his executive authority in order to bypass our state's constitution and enact his ideological agenda through the selective enforcement of state law. Governors don't get to choose which laws they will or will not enforce. Under our system's separation of powers, the legislature makes the laws, and governors' duty is to implement them. Death penalty reprieves are generally granted by governors if there has been a procedural error in the process or if the executive branch is not physically prepared to carry out the death penalty. There was no procedural error in either of these cases. This is not a case of possible mistaken identity or potentially putting the wrong man to death. These are clear-cut cases of guilt and severely heinous crimes. Both cases have survived extensive appeals and scrutiny. There's an old saying, justice delayed is justice denied. Not only is this governor denying justice, he is subverting the rule of law in our Commonwealth. Without the rule of law, the people are confused, and eventually we get frustration and chaos. We have a governor that is new to governing. He clearly does not understand the process and responsibilities of governing. The death penalty is the rule of law in Pennsylvania that is applied in only the most extreme cases, less than 1%. Our governor is acting outside his authority and defying the separation of powers in our government. The governor's actions, ignoring state laws he just doesn't like, should not be allowed to stand. That's why we passed the resolution condemning this misuse of executive authority. I think you can see in the news every day a general breakdown in law and order in our country. We see a pattern of disrespect for the rule of law at the federal executive and now at the state executive. Such disregard filters down and results in disrespect for authority and the law at the individual level. We must restore respect for the rule of law and remind our governor of his rightful place among the three branches of government. I just wanted you to know why we passed the resolution. Thank you, and until next time, God bless.